Thanks, ladies and gentlemen. The staff will be moving around shortly to collect the paddles.
Will there be a Kero bath and service flannelette so we can clean them before we hand them in?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind, Brian's got the floor.
Brian Tidyman, Harvey Bay.
Ladies and gentlemen, please.
Yes, Mr. President, thank you. Just a quick question to you. Who is actually running RSL State Queensland?
Sorry, Brian, I missed that because of the background.
Who is actually running RSL Queensland?
Who is actually running RSL Queensland? That would be the board on your behalf.
Well, how come there's been a couple of decisions made of recent times which have directly affected sub-branch operations that the board knew nothing about? Well, I say my district president.
Brian, really what you're talking about there, I guess, relates back to staff issues. And I again make the point which I made yesterday. The board holds the CEO and the State Secretary accountable. The board does not get involved in the day-to-day operations. The board does not get involved in staff issues or matters. Once we do that, we've crossed that line and we effectively become managers in our own right. That is not the role of the board. Now, at the end of the day, as I said, we have to hold both senior appointments accountable. We also need to be very careful that we don't step into issues that take us before Fair Work. And that's a serious issue. And I'm convinced that over the previous years, certain staff members who form friendships with people, and it's only natural, then want to go and talk to those people after certain actions have happened. The trouble is that puts us in very, very dangerous and uncharted waters with respect to Fair Work. We all have to accept that these days we live in a very litigious society. The board of this organisation is responsible to ensure that the funding used is used correctly. Now, I've made it very clear to the board, we're not going to spend 1 cent in a courtroom that's not absolutely necessary. All right? And I know that there have been some decisions by the senior management team that have probably rankled the members. I make no apology for that. That becomes an issue for Luke and Scott to manage. If they're not doing the job, then the board will be in a position to be able to judge them. As soon as we step across that line and we become involved in those staff decisions, we've abrogated any opportunity we have of holding them accountable. Does anyone want to debate that point?
Well, I'd just like to say, Mr. President, that that's all very well and good. However, when it directly affects the running of sub-branches, I question at times whether it's bloody worth the effort that we put in when these decisions are being made.
Yeah, look, Brian, and I think we all, well, I certainly understand what it is you're talking about, and you're talking about the former district secretary.
Well, that's only part of it, Mr. President. And that was a decision made, it's done, it's dusted, we're not going to change it.
Yep.
The biggest problem with that particular incident is, and still is today, there was no handover of that position by our previous secretary to the new one. And hence, the poor lady in there now is really struggling, and it's not her fault. So, and this directly affects everything in our district. And I think it's, I just think it's unfair on the volunteers to have to try and pick up the pieces and run with it when these decisions are being made. And I look to my board, you and the directors, as my backup.
No, I take your point.
Thank you for your time, Mr. President.
Thanks, Brian. Bob?
Rob Walford.
Sorry.
Just pick up on your point about the nexus between the board and the CEO in a not-for-profit organisation. And I recognise that the literature is rather ambivalent about it in some cases. But in fact, in a corporation, the board is self-sustaining. In a not-for-profit such as ours, the members elect the board. Those members are the sub-branches. And I think in that case, as has been explained in many literature items, the CEO has an obligation to ensure that the board is fully apprised of those matters which may impact on the members. Now, that is not the case in a corporation to the same extent. And I think, with due respect to all concerned, I think that's something that could have been done better on this case. And I think that the individuals concerned need to acknowledge that this is not a corporation. It never will be whilst the members elect the board.
No, I accept that point. And I won't go into private conversations that the board may have had with the CEO. All I'll mention is that I'm quite sure that the lessons have been learnt. Tony.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Just 2 points. I was approached by the delegate of Home Hill during a short break in relation to the Sir Raymond Hewish Award. And if I could just expand on that for the delegates in the room. The matter was spoken about the speedway out there. Well, Home Hill had no idea about that process, and that was because when these individuals had turned around and applied, they turned around and did a search on the internet through the grant process and subsequently put it through. They indicated that their nearest sub-branch was Home Hill. So Home Hill was not aware of that. As a result of the circumstances that have occurred, that application form is now being amended so that each sub-branch is aware and must approve or be aware of what grants are being made for the Sir Raymond Hewish. The other issue, ladies and gentlemen, relates to item 13 of the agenda, and that is the RSL Queensland Branch 2016 Annual Report. All of you would be aware that there was an addendum to that report, and I believe that that needs to be moved as part of the report, Mr Chairman.
Thanks, Tony. So, just to make sure that we're clear on that, there's an addendum to the report. Are you moving, Tony?
Yes, Mr Chairman. The motion is that the report from the Anzac and RSL Centenary Commemorative Committee be accepted as part of the annual report of 2016.
Okay, do we have a seconder? Bajimba, thank you. The paddles are gone, but the arms are still there, so those in favour? Against? Thank you.
Thank you.
Peter.
Just after a clarification, certificates of appreciation from state, are they still being processed?
I believe so.
Okay.
I keep on signing them.
Right. No, we just had a gentleman who 18 years had been fundraising and doing other work, and I would like to get one through for him. Second question I had, and I only became aware of it during the break. Luke, his report was actually among all the other reports, being the financial one. I think it's a bad place to have it. It should be a separate report and a separate move or a motion.
Thanks, Peter. Kevin.
Yes, thank you. Yesterday I could not help but be impressed by the presentation that was given by Dr. Matty Romanek. That followed on, of course, from the study that was done earlier on the Vietnam veterans. I actually took part in that study. In our breakout session yesterday, we heard that 50% of members under 50 are not renewing. Now, I think the work that we are doing, or RSL Queensland is doing through the Gallipoli Medical Research, is absolutely fantastic. It's something we should all be proud of, and the membership in general should take ownership of that. And I believe that we need to sell that more to the membership as to why they should renew and continue to be part of this great organisation. And my question is RSL Queensland going to continue the great work of collaborating with the Gallipoli Medical Research and continuing their funding of projects?
Thanks, Kevin. Look, ladies and gentlemen, I can't talk on your behalf, but I'll give you my personal view. I think the answer to that question has to be yes. Now, what that looks like into the future, I don't know. But seeing as how I'm here and I've been asked the question, I'll give you an opportunity perhaps into the future. Gallipoli at the moment undertakes, I think, 4 or 5 streams of research. You heard from Professor Crawford last night. His particular research is liver and hematology and liver disease. One of the things that I kicked around in discussion was how much time do the researchers at Gallipoli Medical Research actually spend researching as opposed to grant writing? Right? And the reason they are there grant writing is that's their only source of income. They're not actually funded, Miriam, correct me if I'm wrong, by Ramsay Health. They are provided accommodations through Ramsay Health, but the researchers themselves need to go away and find the dollars to enable them to go and do the research. So, what would it look like, for example, if RSL Queensland decided to provide some funding into Gallipoli to establish a veteran health study centre? Now, if we did that, that would be the first in the country. What do you think of that concept? If I was to tell you that concept might cost anywhere between $3 and $4 million a year, it's a lot of money, all right? But what that would mean, of course, is that RSL Queensland would be recognised again as a world leader in establishing a true veteran health research facility, which then could link into other entities such as the Phoenix Foundation in New South Wales. It would enable us then to engage with the University of the Sunshine Coast, who's also heavily involved in the issue of research into mental health, not just post-traumatic. So we would suddenly find that we'd have feelers going out all over the country. What do you think of that concept? Now, I haven't discussed it with the CEO, and I haven't really discussed it with the board, all right? But I'm asked the question, and that's what this Congress is all about. What do you think about us putting an umbrella over the top of all those researchers to provide funding so they don't spend time nugatory writing grants, and we provide that money so they can go and do the bloody research?
We're going to do the grant writing?
No, we won't put it to the vote, because what we actually need is a proper business case. So if you don't mind, I'll go to the friends in Gallipoli and say, provide a business case, that'll come back to the board, it'll go through the process. All right? But we talk about being relevant. Well, you heard yesterday from Maddie that the relevance is not just in Queensland, it's not just in Australia, it's now going to be in Canada later this year. I can tell you that Gallipoli have been approached by the US Department of Veterans Affairs themselves in terms of data sharing. That's never happened before. And that's as a consequence of the research that was done by Gallipoli into post-traumatic stress. The Americans have looked at that body of work and thought, this is brilliant. They're now looking at the way Australia looks after its veteran community. Now, to put some context around what we're talking about, in the United States alone, the funding just around the mental health piece, I believe in the United States, Miriam, correct me if I'm wrong, it's in the order of 20+ billion just on mental health. And they haven't got it right. All right? So imagine what we can do as an international community if we're all engaged in working together, as opposed to working in isolated little stovepipes all over the place. So with your tacit approval, we'll continue to explore down that path. Anyone object? Because, hang on Bill, I'll come to it. I don't want to wake up tomorrow morning and find there's an email out there saying that, you know, what I've done is gone and said that we're going to spend millions of dollars again. I'm happy if someone puts their name to it, but we do seem to have a track record where people don't put their names to it, but they do go to the media. Bill.
Very briefly, Mr. President, the last couple of years the board has appointed me to be on the oversight committee of GMRF. So I basically take it as my responsibility to watch your money. I just want to tell you that there is some really good research which is yet to be published. And I'm not allowed to tell you what it is because, you know, the researchers need to go through the processes. But where the research is going at the moment is not just how this stuff affects service members. They're now looking at whether it can affect your children. Now, if you want to make sure that this current generation of servicemen, and it affects the children of men, not women, if you want to make sure that the children of this current generation of servicemen have the best possible opportunity to grow up as happy individuals, then it's my view that we need to continue funding this research. It's not just about us, it's about our kids.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dave Ryan, Tully Sub-Branch. I haven't a question. I did have one yesterday, but my thoughts are congratulations to the Queensland branch on their initiative of the homelessness. I'm proud of it. This was my intention to come down here to really talk about this and get it fixed up. And I've noticed now with your relationship with the Salvation Army, a wonderful job. And I thank you very much for your initiative in that way, because this is what the RSL is about, is this, not abusing each other. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll come to you, Rob.
Oh, sorry, I thought I'd have to wait.
No, you're right.
Rob Walton, Majimba. I was asked to raise a couple of issues in relation to some matters that have been covered before, and I beg your indulgence again. And having spoken to a few people during the break, I was able to put together a few ideas. It seems to be that a lot of information has been available, but hasn't always been cogently provided to us. And I think that's led to a lot of these issues that we've been touching on this morning. It seems to me that you mentioned, Luke, if I might direct my issues to you, there's an ATO private ruling outstanding. My understanding is that that is specifically related to the expenses issue that directors have been paid and the possible PAYG treatment of those expenses.
That's correct. So the issue we've got at hand, regardless of name, out-of-pockets, honorariums, any other name that you want to give to it, the name is irrelevant. What the tax office is concerned about is the dollar value, so the value, and the recurrence, so how regularly that is paid. The risk is that if those two aren't in check, we risk that volunteer will receive a PAYG statement, and that may affect things in their personal circumstance. So we've taken pretty extensive taxation advice on the topic, but at the end of the day, it's what the ATO thinks that matters. So the private binding ruling we'll seek. Strictly, it'll be binding on RSL Queensland as the person seeking the private binding ruling, but we will take that and provide guidance to districts and sub-branches once we learn the ATO's position on those two dimensions.
Thank you. Could I also ask that you confirm that as a risk mitigator in the meantime, there is an increasing tendency to use credit cards rather than cash reimbursements?
So the historic way that directors were ensured that they were not out of pocket in the conduct of their volunteer duties as directors was replaced on the 1st of February of this year with a credit card equivalent to any of the staff that also hold a credit card. So directors are enabled to incur an expense that is directly related to their conduct and duties as a director of RSL Queensland. So a receipt must be produced. There's an electronic expense management system inside State Branch. Those receipts go in on a monthly basis, are acquitted off against those direct expenses. And then there's a two-party sign-off system between Stuart and myself to make sure there's separation between management and board.
Thank you. Further, in relation to FBT, which was one of the issues raised by our colleague, prior to you and the current President coming into their seats, FBT was not properly dealt with, and I think you alluded to the fact that the systems were antiquated and unable to keep up with the requirement. I also understand from something, I don't know whether it was in Mr Ryan's letter or I've heard it elsewhere, but as a result of those deficiencies, $321,000 was paid on a self-assessment basis to the ATO, which satisfied the ATO at the time. Further, could I just ask for a clarification? It seems to me that if FBT was incompetently dealt with for the board members, it was probably incompetently dealt with for the staff. And I just wonder if you could clarify just what extent to which the board's FBT liabilities comprise within that 321K.
Sure. So on the 3rd of June 2015, the Chief Financial Officer independently undertook a review of the FBT treatment inside of State Branch. Part of our expenditure and the transformation work we're doing to implement a new enterprise resource planning and financial platform is because of the poor systems and processes of the past didn't allow us to see the granular detail to capture FBT transactions correctly. On the back of Goran's review, we identified that there was a short payment in FBT across the last number of years. We ran out those calculations and did a voluntary disclosure to the ATO. The outstanding FBT amount ultimately payable of give or take about $321,000 across those 5 years was split in near as makes no difference, 35, 65, 35 directors, 65% staff.
And can you confirm for the benefit of members that FBT is now fully compliant with legal requirements?
Correct. That's an ongoing piece of work because as we evolve and change the way we do things at State Branch, we always have to be conscious of making sure that our compliance and taxation approaches are kept up to speed. So yes, they are, and they'll continue to evolve as State Branch evolves to make sure that we're nice and compliant with the ATO laws.
Thanks for that, and I think I can now report back to my members in respect of my confidence in what's happened in relation to those matters. My final point is for the Chair, and that is, do you agree that the Board underestimated the crisis in confidence that has arisen as a result of the lack of transparency about the simple matters that we've just discussed?
Look, I think it's a difficult question or statement to answer. My reading of it was quite simply that prior to my election, there were some processes in play. We knew that we had to make some changes. The Board knew they had to make some changes. But over the last 12 months, the Board, to a large extent, has almost been in a siege mentality where they have not known where the next anonymous letter was going to come from. They became, to some extent and quite rightly, more focused on that, particularly when it came to the issue of reputational management through the media. Does the Board object to the changes that have been introduced in the not so distant past? No, they don't. They accept the fact that there's an obligation to disclose, and I have to say I was quite pleased when I went to the CEO in January of this year, and I'll backtrack. This time last year the Board, as I said, had agreed that there would be changes to the way out-of-pockets were dealt with. Now, when this first raised its head, of course, everyone looked at the State Board. I was actually thinking a little bit wider than that. And if some members here might remember, I actually sent an email out to the district presidents asking them to come back and tell me what was being paid at the district and sub-branch level. Because I knew that the issue at the State Board would flow all the way down. There's no demarcation in the ATO's mind as to where you sit in the organisation. This Board were unanimous in agreeing that the changes were right and proper. At the sub-branch level, that has not been the case. Indeed, some sub-branches came back and said, none of your business. We are separate legal entities. What we pay our directors is our business, not yours. No, I'm not joking. I'm also aware that some sub-branches came back and said this is what we pay, and it was well in excess of anything that the state directors were getting. And that's why we knew we had to grip this up. Because again, the criticism that's come has been aimed at this Board. But the reputation of the entire league is there, so long as we have one individual at sub-branch or district level outside of the environment in which we operate in. Does that make sense to everyone? Right. So my plea again to the delegates here is you go back and you'll notice, for example, those who remember when I go around the district AGMs these days, when it comes to that little issue of what we pay our district board in terms of honorariums and out-of-pockets, I make the point that you've got to be mindful of the ATO requirement, so it can't be seen as income. So therefore, now, the district AGMs I've been to, any out-of-pockets have to be acquitted with receipts. Well, that flows down to sub-branches. And I suspect, if we're genuinely honest amongst ourselves, there might be issues that sit between a sub-branch and an amalgamated entity where almost the same people sit on both boards. They might be named differently, but go and look at what's on the website. I do. I'm damn sure the ATO will. All right? And they'll ask those questions. So that's why it's important that the body of work that Luke's doing at the moment is not just around the state directors, it's around the entire RSL in Queensland. And let's be honest, folks, we have some very wealthy entities out there. Does anyone wish to ask any questions on that point? And mate, I'm not sure if I absolutely answered your question. Yep. Thanks, mate. I'm happy to take it. If you want to pop back up later and ask me the question again so I can get it clear in my mind. Wendy?
Mr Chairman, through you, to the gentleman that asked about the catafalque. The catafalque is correct in the dictionary, but the people that come to our memorial services is a catafalque party. And the definition of that is on the Army website, and which is catafalque parties are mounted around a coffin as a sign of respect and around memorials on occasion of remembrance, such as Anzac Day. The catafalque party consists of 4 members of an armed guard who stand with their heads buried and their heads bowed and their arms, weapons, reversed facing outwards approximately 1 metre from the coffin or memorial, as a symbolic form of respect for those who have fallen. So you're correct in your dictionary interpretation, but the word is a catafalque party.
Thanks, Wendy.
Through the chair, Gary Aldridge, Greenbank. Prior to our break, you were making inquiries of funding for the Invictus Games. Well, during the break, we had a little bit of a head together and an epiphany came through that if every sub-branch donated $5 per member, which is about a pot, you did pretty well. Yeah, we're quite prepared to do that. I don't know if the other members are. Like if you've only got 12 members, that's $60. If you've got 100, $500.
No, look, I accept the generous offer, and I'm standing here thinking what I'll do is I'll talk to the district presidents for them to come back out to the sub-branches. I just think that we've got to be able to look at some mechanism where we provide some funding back into not the Australian International Military Games, but the support of the veteran athletes who are going to the Games.
Likewise.
Yep, no. So I'll talk to the district presidents about this after the AGM. We've got a board meeting on Monday.
Taken. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's Cathy Sweet from the GAP sub-branch. I have a question, Mr Chairman, regarding the marry-up with the Salvation Army regarding their assistance to gay and lesbian defence members and other religions, as in the Jewish members and Muslim members, etc.
So I'm sorry, the point of the question?
The point of the question is, traditionally the Salvation Army hasn't assisted or has actually in some places turned away gay couples and lesbians, and defence makes no distinction. The same with religion. Defence makes no distinction. And I just want to ensure that with us having the Salvation Army help us and us working with the Salvation Army, which I think is a brilliant idea, they've always been really good, to make sure that their members on the ground understand that we don't care about anyone's religion or sexuality. We help everyone, or they're all members.
Yeah.
Scott, do you want to do a tag
Yeah,
team
look,
on this?
maybe if I can take that. Absolutely. As an organisation, we're here to help veterans absolutely regardless of their race, colour, creed, sexual orientation, and our clear requirement to the Salvation Army is that they do the same. I think they've probably changed as an organisation as well. So Chris, who gave the presentation yesterday, I was having a discussion with him last night, and he was talking about some work that he'd done, particularly in some of the spaces that you're talking about. So I think they've probably changed as an organisation, but absolutely, it's black and white. We help veterans regardless of who they are.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ken?
Terry Brennan
Terry
Brennan from the Blackwell Sub-Branch. Mr President, all I'm after is, can you or someone else up there give us a definitive answer on the current status of the building acquisition and maintenance program? Is it still in existence, or is it dead in the water? Because I keep getting conflicting information between districts.
I guess I'll do a tag team on this. I'll answer part of the question, and I'll get Luke to take the second. The part that I'll talk about is probably directly unrelated to your question, but it relates back to this organisation. Last year, for example, we had a motion that said we are going to spend $2 million a year on buildings for sub-branches. I mean, it was all around welfare centres, but it was actually $2 million. The trouble is, it was uncapped. All right? So let's timeline $2 million to infinity, because that's effectively what you agreed to. So how does this board then manage that? And indeed, if you come back to the Deloitte brief yesterday, one of the things that they mentioned as a weakness was the ability for the board to be directed to do things that they have no control over, that actually directly relate back to their duties as directors in safeguarding the management of the funding and the spending of money on behalf of the membership. All right? We can add some minor complexity around it by saying that both the ATO and the ACNC don't necessarily regard expenditure of money on buildings as welfare. All right? So Luke, perhaps you'd like to take it from there.
There's effectively two parts to the answer. The first part is around understanding the value that is delivered by the expenditure by State Branch to conduct maintenance on sub-branch buildings. We're just washing up that piece of outcome from the first 6 pilot sites, and that's going to go to the board in the next month or two. The second part is around the ACNC. So I've raised this with the ACNC when I had the very first meeting after we received the voluntary investigation letter. They do have established guidance around social housing in terms of the balance that must be struck on the expenditure levels of buildings separately to the work that gets done from the building. But they don't have any specific guidance as such on the particulars as it applies to the league. So I've raised it with them because I want some guidance back for them. That then helps us able to meet our obligations to the ACNC under the balance of what must be spent on the direct delivery of welfare as opposed to the maintenance of buildings as such.
Does that mean that I can go back to my members and say that the BAM project is still on the books, or has it been cancelled? I.e., you said there's been 6 pilot projects. When this all started, there was going to be a pilot project in in the North Queensland district, and it was a decision between my sub-branch and the Cloncurry sub-branch. We decided to let Cloncurry be first, and my understanding is that nothing's happened up there. So I thought there was a pilot program in each of the districts. So I guess I want a definitive answer, because this is a very sensitive issue for my members. Does the project exist or doesn't it?
So think about it this way. The project exists. It is currently suspended until such times as I can get better guidance from the ACNC to ensure that State Branch meets its charitable objects and obligations to the ACNC. We went out to all the districts and 6 came back with sub-branches that may require maintenance. Some districts had no sub-branches that required maintenance and did not participate in the pilot.
I don't want to get into an argument here, but that's not correct. When that report was done, I'll talk about North Queensland. There was 2 sub-branch buildings that were condemned as uninhabitable, Cloncurry and Blackwell. Now we certainly went back to, well, I'll stand corrected, my president's up there somewhere. that we went back to the state and said Cloncurry is our building, and then a decision was made that Cloncurry is to be taken off the trial.
Yeah, so I think from remembering back to that board meeting, that was around included the fact that buildings may need to be demolished as part of the building and maintenance program. So not maintenance of the building, but simply demolishing them because of the safety risk or if there was asbestos or something like that.
But as you know, and I don't want to drag this out, we then had a workplace health and safety issue earlier this year, which the state branch abandoned me on, and I had to sort it out with the state government myself personally to get access back into our building. I had to close it for 2 months. Now, we addressed that problem, and thankfully we're going to get reimbursed for the cost of that. But again, I was left to do that by myself, so I'm a bit confused. Can I expect that someday someone's going to turn up and say to me, I'm going to give you a new building, or we're going to give you a new premises and rent it somewhere? Will that happen? I need to tell my members, they're getting really frustrated by it.
Right, so first point, yes, the building and maintenance program exists, it's currently suspended. That's the status of it. Your particular issue in your sub-branch, where you're responsible for the workplace health and safety and how you operate your own facility, I don't take on that risk, but I'm happy to provide advice, and we did so as we engaged with you and sort of worked out what was going on through Workplace Health and Safety Queensland.
I received no advice.
I was on all of the emails, I saw it, and we produced an advice internally, but separately, your responsibilities in your own sub-branch building are yours, because that's as the common law describes them, and workplace health and safety law. But I'm also very happy, whether it's now or after this, to come and provide further advice on the topic.
That'd be good. Thank you.
Yes, Mr President. James Carroll, Malanda again. My question is, does Queensland RSL have an in-house media specialist? The reason why I ask this question is because of the ongoing false accusations being used or using social media, which I don't use. I don't know how to use it. I'm suggesting that RSL Queensland weekly, fortnightly, monthly, put out little specific answers that sub-branches can insert in their local news print, particularly in country areas. The reason I've come to this thought is that on the Atherton Tableland we have a perpetual candidate for the Greens Party in the local, with state, federal and local elections. Now she puts an article in the local papers every week in letters to the editor. She can't be that bright that she can do a new subject every week, and we're suggesting, or it's been suggested, that she gets these the wording from Greens, either federal or state offices. Could we consider something coming out of RSL Queensland head office that sub-branches could insert into the local letters to the editor?
I think we just need, I understand the point, but I think we just need to be careful that we don't seem to be engaging in what I'd call loosely propaganda across the state. I know that a number of sub-branches at the moment write weekly columns. I mean, Bill from Redcliffe does one. I know that my own sub-branch, for example, has a column in the local bulletin. So there's nothing to stop the sub-branches from writing those column pieces themselves. Is there sufficient information on our website and in the RSL news in terms of what we're doing? Yes. Coming back to the issue of social media, we're not going to get engaged in a debate on social media with some of these people. Some people might find this offensive, but I'll tell you what, a lot of those folk on social media are, they're trolls. Right? And we all know the definition of a troll because when we were kids, we used to learn about it in the books. They're ugly little creatures that sit in caves in the dark, or they sit under bridges, and they used to scare people as they went over the bridge. So let's not get involved in that process. We're better than that. Right? But when it comes back to newsworthy items that need to be out and about, by all means go and talk to the local paper. You know, we've got Ross Eastgate over here who writes a column. Go and talk to Ross and get his advice.
Yeah, I was looking more of that we all sing out of the same hymn book, not there's someone saying one thing in one paper and then down the road they're saying the exact opposite.
No, but I don't think we'd be off message if we stay to the facts in terms of what it is we're reporting through our website and what you're picking up from your district presidents when they come back and brief after each board meeting. All that information is consistent. I think you're better off tailoring the message for your local community.
Yeah, that's where I want to get it to.
Yeah.
To the local community, not so much the members of the sub-branch, but letting the local community know what we're up to, to the benefit of all.
Yep, no, I understand that point. But, you know, we do have folk in Anzac House who write articles. I'm quite sure that if you want some guidance, we can provide that guidance.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ross, do you...
Look, could I make a comment? I understand the import of the question, and I know that, you know, not everybody is an easy writer. And you know, both Bill, Chair and myself have weekly columns. But it might be that a small sample start that's got some state news or something in it that's relevant to the whole state, that can be published in any regional paper to which sub-branches might add one or two pars of their own, might be helpful. Is that where the question was leading?
I think so, Ross, yeah.
So that there's one common message that says, you know, that we've had the state AGM and we're going to sack all the directors. I think that's what. So that there's no misinformation out there. But then and say that perhaps the point about, you know, the place we've just opened in Cairns or something like that, that's got a statewide influence. And maybe a little point about the fact that there's a new art union open, so there's 4 or 5 points that could go to the paper because they'll edit it, and then sub-branches can add their own. And can I say, you need to keep it very short.
Yeah.
Okay, to get it published. That's the key to it.
Thanks, Ross.
Yeah, Cameron Dorwood, Farley Northern Beaches sub-branch. I want to address the floor and have people think about an issue with our memorabilia. Now, many years ago, on Anzac Day, there was a little plastic Anzac badge that most of the school kids got, and that was pretty well summed up any of that sort of thing. Now, over the last probably 10 years, there's been a range of memorabilia, biros, stubby coolers, badges that's become available, and I don't think there'd be a sub-branch in here that hasn't utilised that option to raise money for their sub-branch. Now, that seems pretty innocent way of raising money, and it is very lucrative. Yesterday we talked about engaging our younger veterans and getting them into the RSL. The downside of what's happening is I would suggest that probably 90% of that memorabilia is sold by people with RSL badges on in shopping centres and wherever. Speaking to one of my 26-year-old twins a few weeks ago, he has quite a few mates in the ADF, and it's great that they engage with one another when they come back from deployment. The feeling amongst these young men distresses me, as they have a total non-allegiance to Anzac Day. They see Anzac Day as disrespectful in as much as it has become commercialised to an extent that it has lost to them all their values. Now, these young men and women probably have limited knowledge of prior conflicts as early as Vietnam, whereas us older members, and myself included, were fortunate enough to have time with World War I diggers and understand back to the roots of where Anzac Day started and the RSL. It concerns me that because of what I call bookface, all this information is getting spread around these young people, and that is the way they see this commemoration. Now, we have companies like Franklin Mint that make clocks with Spitfire planes that come out of them. They make sands of Gallipoli, they make coins. All that money, as I see it, goes to a commercial operation. The RSL or any of the other ex-servicemen organisation do not gain from that. The only thing we're gaining from that is driving these young people away from this very important commemorations through the year. We need to be able to address that, whether, I don't know how you go about it, and I just put it to everybody to think about that. Put it to you, Stuart, for your comments, and I think it's a very important thing that needs to be addressed, and especially when we had, look, with Matty, with the transition from military life back into civilian life, and part of that is with our organisations, not just our organisations. One way we're wanting these people to join our organisations, which we must do because we need fresh brains in this organisation, and by an innocent way of raising money, we're driving them away. How do we fix it?
Well, I'll give you my view, and I know it's contentious for some. But for me, we have two significant days in the year: Anzac Day and Remembrance Day. Anzac Day consists of effectively two parts: the dawn service and then the morning march. I make no apology by saying that the most deeply moving commemorative element of the day is the dawn service. We follow the script from Canon Garland. And those living in Brisbane and those visiting, do yourself a favour, go up to Kangaroo Point, look at the plaque on the church about Canon Garland. And his simple, dignified service is now replicated across the world. It's simple, deeply commemorative, deeply moving. It's not a TV show. And I've noticed a number of sub-branches now wanting to start to outdo each other. Now, I was unfortunate to be at a dining, actually Kathy and I were at the same dining in at 7 Brigade last year. And I had a number of senior serving officers come up to me and saying they're never going back there because they found it offensive. I'm not going to mention the sub-branch. But their view was it was a theatrical production, not a commemorative service. I know that there now seems to be creeping in this concept that you fire a volley, a gunshot. Well, the trouble is you've got to deal with the fact that you're dealing with young men and women in that audience who suffer post-traumatic stress, and the last thing they want to do is be subject to gunfire, right? They're not there for that. They're there to remember their mates. And that's what we should all do. Later in the morning, particularly in Brisbane, there is a march. Well, guess what? That's the family part of it. That's the fun part of it. That's where the community comes out to thank those marching for their service, whether they saw active service or not. But when we gather together in the morning at the dawn, we are there to remember those who never came home. We don't do that by releasing doves. We don't do that by having surf boats. If that's where we want to go, I actually think we've lost the plot. I won't say any more. Coming back to the commercialisation, absolutely, Cam, you're right, because there's every company out there now trying to make a buck on this thing called Anzac. All right? And everyone has a way of doing it. The military shop, they're very slick at it because they promise 10% of everything they sell goes to Soldier On. I've got no problem with that, but it's a marketing tool. All right? That's not what we're about. Sub-branches, and I'm a member of a sub-branch that's like the church mouse. They have nothing. They rely upon the community, and it's all about badge selling in that week of Anzac Week and Remembrance Week. We're selling the badges that we get through various agencies, but we're not into the commercialisation of it. That's not the intent. And I think the message that we need to take back to our young men and women is that it's all about commemoration, it's all about remembrance, it's all about sacrifice. All right? And each of us here has an obligation to go and do that. Let's look at what happens at the Australian War Memorial. The dawn service is deeply moving. It's bloody cold, right? But it's deeply moving. That should be the marker across the state. I won't say any more.
Yeah, if I could just finish, I've had a bit of a thought, and thank you for your words, Stuart. Maybe if everyone next year, when they set up their little stall in Bunnings or wherever they do, have a little sign that says, money's raised from these funds, help support our RSL sub-branch, and the money raised goes towards welfare to assist our veterans. So at least people can say, righto, you know, like you go into the pub and you buy a meat raffle ticket and it's for a soccer club or whatever, you know what it is. If we can do that and get that message that it's not just a money-making commercial thing, that money actually goes to help veterans, maybe that simple thing would fix the problem. I don't know. Something to think about. Thank you.
Thanks, mate.
Sorry, Stuart, if I could just address one of the points that were made that I think is just worth clarifying. So there was just a discussion that the Speaker then had that they were concerned that particularly young service people aren't aware of Australian military history, what's gone on before, and the purpose of the Anzac Day service. I'd just like to clarify it. I'm ex-regular Army, but I'm still serving in the reserves. My daughter is an 18-year-old private. And so I just thought it worth confirming that young service men and women are given instruction on Australian military history, and that continues through their careers as well. So absolutely, everyone's understanding of what happened will be different. They don't have the benefit of having the opportunity to speak to World War I veterans because they've all passed on. So their knowledge is going to be different, but they do have a deep and personal understanding. And for many of the younger service men and women, they have a different but still very personal feeling about this because they've lost friends that they've served alongside over the last 10 or 15 years. So that still does live on in the current service generation.
Thanks, Scott.
Melanie from North Gold Coast. Just a response to that guy. A couple of days after Anzac Day this year, I listened to Triple J, as you know, that's my age, I listened to Triple J. They have this program called Hack, and it's a talk-back program. I think it's about 6 o'clock or 5:30 to 6 o'clock every afternoon. They had some guys, and it was mainly about the response of an ABC journalist made some comments around Anzac Day. So there was these young diggers, well, all three services actually ran in to say their point of view. A lot of them, like that guy said, they don't want to know anything. They won't participate in Anzac Day because they see it as it's commercialised because that's the way the media puts it out. They won't go because it's a booze up, piss up. People see it as a day off and it's all about pokies and tour. They don't see it as our day. It belongs to us. I want to go and remember the guy that, you know, has died alongside me. So it is relevant. I don't know if you can replay Hack back, but it was really quite confronting and it's raw. These guys need that help and I don't know how we do it because the media gets hold of it and just about everyone, you know, club, pub, has that two up and it is all about, well, it's a day off. Let's, you know, get pissed and play two up. It's not, we need to, I don't know how we do it, bring it back relevant to us, that it's our day and it's a family day because I'm one, I've got, you know, little kids and you have to, I don't know how you find that fine line that it's us and your family, you can bring your family along, but it is, the guys are out there and they don't see it as it's our day anymore.
No, I understand the point.
And just another thing that he brought up about trying to make, the community aware with, what's happened down south. I'm lucky that I've got a 16-year-old son that's tech savvy. So I said to him, look, help me, we want to put out there what we do. So we got all our stats that we have to give to state, put it on a piece of A4 paper, made it all colourful and said, this is how many volunteer hours that we've done this year. This is how many volunteer kilometres we've done this year. This is how much money we've spent on our veterans in the community this year. And the community would come up to the table when we're doing badge selling and think, gee whiz, that's a lot of hours, that's a lot of money that you've given back to your community. So they could see it in black and white that their $5 from that badge is going back to the veterans within their community, and it has helped. Happy to share that. I don't know if, I think State's got it on your little signature block. It's quite easy to do, relevant to your sub-branch, to your area, so maybe State can help the sub-branches that aren't tech savvy to get that out there.
Yeah, no, thank you for that.
Yeah, Mr. President, I'm John Ratch and I'm from Billawheeler sub-branch.
Yes, John.
There's one item that appeared about a month ago, and I'm surprised it hasn't aired in the conference here before now, and that is the letter that came out from the State Secretary with a little sample letter that we were supposed to send back to our local member about forming a Minister for Veterans Affairs at state level. Now, my hair curled a bit when I read that, because I think that if you're going to split your resources between federal and state, you're going to get into all sorts of trouble. And the strange part was, on Thursday morning before I left Billawheeler, I was listening to an ABC program, and they were interviewing the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, and she was talking about how the Veterans Affairs state would become a portfolio in a Liberal National Party government if they got to be elected. And they asked her to explain just what it was supposed to do, and I'm afraid she just didn't have a bloody clue what she was talking about. And then on Thursday's paper, there was a little article in the Courier Mail about the fact that the current opposition would bring in a Minister for Veterans Affairs if they got into power. Now, it's just funny, in my opinion, that this suddenly bobbed up 2 days before a state conference. And I don't know whether other people might have missed it, but is there somebody in amongst the hierarchy of the state RSL who has political ambitions and hopes to be the first Minister for Veterans Affairs in Queensland?
No, if I can, I don't think any of the board, including myself, have political aspirations. That's the last thing I'd want to be doing. Look, to answer your question, moving back to the first part, it was actually RSL Queensland who went out and lobbied both the current state government and the opposition around what it is they were going to do for the veteran piece. Now, yes, we have a federal Minister for Veterans Affairs, and that really covers off on the DVA piece. I'm not going to ask the question in terms of how many gold card and TPIs we have here, but what does the state provide you for that? No, actually, it provides a bit. Discount on electricity, discount on travel, right, and so it goes. So the League will always be apolitical, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be influencing both the government and the opposition prior to an election in terms of what it is we'd like from them. Now, Queensland is the only state remaining standing that doesn't have a dedicated Minister for Veterans Affairs. All the other states do. And if you had Dan Tehan here this morning, he'd be telling you that his wish is that each state's had one, because then it makes it easier for him then to engage the relevant state government in terms of what support they can provide to the veteran community. Because the state does actually provide support into veterans. What we've got to do is make sure that we keep them focused on providing support to veterans at a state level, if that makes sense. All right? Now, coming back to DVA, Human Services, they're going to get rid of DVA, etc. I make the point and I got it a little bit wrong yesterday, it's $11,347 million that the federal government allocated in the last budget. But in addition to that, there's another $2.5 billion on grants. The government and the opposition are committed to DVA. That said, I think we've all got to understand the fact that 10, 15 years from now, that may not be the case, for the simple reason that the number of veterans and those dependent upon the services of DVA will be greatly reduced. And do we not expect that the governments of the day will look for measures where they can save dollars? Absolutely. That's why it's important that we as an entity, along with our brother ESOs and sister ESOs, come together with one voice to tell both the government and the opposition in terms of what it is we want. Now, if you remember, in the life of this Parliament, that's the federal Parliament, a decision was made to bring the Minister for Veterans Affairs and give him some other portfolios, and I think one of them they were talking about was human services. That hasn't happened, right? Because Prime Minister Turnbull quickly realised that they'd made a tactical error in doing that. We've got to keep the pressure on, right? But at the same time, we must engage politically. If you study the history of the League, that indeed has been our situation since 1916. Now, as I said yesterday, it was earlier, years ago, for the simple reason the chambers were full of men who'd been in the military. That's no longer the case. I think in the House of Reps at the moment we'd be lucky to have about 5. I'm not sure there's anyone in the Senate. Bill, you might be able to correct me. So it then becomes an issue of maintaining a view to the politicians in terms of the importance of the ex-service community. Now, do governments focus on that? Absolutely. When Kevin Rudd was elected, I was fortunate at the time to be one of the first visitors to Alan Griffith, and Alan was appointed as the Minister for Veterans Affairs. And he opened up the conversation by saying that Labor had targeted 8 seats federally because of the veteran vote, and they won 7 of them. And they won them almost on a lie, right? Because if you remember, they put out a program which was a manifesto, 22 points in terms of what they were going to look at. And they were going to look at indexation of pensions, weren't they? And everyone here thought your beauty, DFRDB, has just been fixed. Wrong. They didn't talk about that. They were talking about pensions from DVA. Now, interestingly enough, the one seat they didn't win was Thawangowa. There was only about 800 votes in it. And the reason they didn't win it, quite simply, was Prime Minister Rudd took the troops out of Iraq. All the guys in Townsville wanted to go where? Iraq. Right? So it's important. They do listen. We've got to make sure that we get the right message into them. So we've got to work out what's reasonable. Coming back to the media piece, I don't know whether anyone saw the SBS interview I did on the night of Anzac Day. But all the commentary on the media in the afternoon had been around pubs, two-up, boozing up. And I don't know whether we've got a representative from Sequel here at the moment, but I got a phone call late in the afternoon saying, would you mind going on to an interview with the SBS, sorry, not the SBS, Sky News, around the importance of Anzac Day? And I did. And it was quite a friendly interview in that I was given carte blanche to talk about what I wanted to talk about. And what do they talk about? Remembrance, commemoration. No, I made the point, it's not about booze, it's not about two-up. It's about men and women coming together to remember. And then I made the point, because this was a point I made for the politicians because they watch those programs. And I said at the end of the day, we are always going to be disappointed because we never ever get what exactly we want through the budgetary process, for the simple reason no government of any political persuasion will ever have abilities with an unlimited budget to go and give us everything we want. So therefore we must be careful in terms of what we ask for. what we ask for has to be achievable. And I'm sure, having talked to both Amanda and Dan on a number of occasions, they listen. Right? And that's why it's important for congresses like this, when you come up with concepts that you want national to take to the government, it's achievable. Otherwise we're just wasting time. All right? But coming back to the Queensland piece, I'm hoping that as a consequence of the election and the timing back to the point of the couple of days before this Congress, had nothing to do with that. It's all about when the current Premier might call the election. And there was a very strong view that she might have called it about now. Right? How do I know that? Well, I met with Tim Nichols about 2 months ago. And he gave me their view of what they were going to do for the veteran community. And what he said to me was, we've got X numbers of millions that we're going to give to the veteran community. And I said, Minister, please don't. Don't give us money. Give us opportunity. So you now see that in their program, where they're now saying, and I think, Scott, it's a figure of 200 in the public service, right? That's where we need to be. That's what they do in the United States. That's what they do in other states. And that's why it's important that we have a dedicated Minister for Veterans Affairs in Queensland. Now, he or she will have other portfolio responsibilities, there's no question of that. But at least then you've got someone that we can go and talk to who can lobby directly into the Premier.
Yes, just I thought we don't need another minister in Queensland, I don't think.
No, well, it won't be another dedicated politician. It'll be one of the current girls, but they'll be given the portfolio. And it's the portfolio that's important.
Stuart Merv Brown from Brisbane North. Just to add to that, because we are apolitical, I went along as a private member because I heard the launch was on. And Tim Nichols did raise the issues, but he did, and I think there's a couple other people in the room were there as well, he did make the point they will not cut across anything federally.
Yep.
They will be looking at transition of our current Defence Force people, helping them find jobs, going to the businesses outside and doing it throughout Queensland, not southeast Queensland, the whole of Queensland. And he spoke very highly of the RSL and that they would like to, and he would give this guy the opportunity to work with state RSL in what we view and what we see we need for our current people coming out of the Defence Force.
Thanks, Merv. Wendy.
Wendy Taylor from RSL SED, Southeastern District. Forgot where I was. We facilitate the Anzac Day Parade in Brisbane, and we are very fortunate to be able to do that. So the RSL does not own it. It is the units and the associations that march that do it. Your comments about younger veterans not being involved in Anzac Day, from a Brisbane point of view, that is not correct. We have over 140 units and associations that march, and a lot of those associations and units that march is definitely the current serving members of Army, Navy and Air Force. They march alongside, well, they march in their own group with the rest of the veterans. And the younger veterans are coming back in droves, We have not lost, even with all the problems that we have seen within RSL over the last 12 months, we haven't seen a decrease in that parade. It was bigger and I will say better than it ever has been. The participation from those that stand on the side, lots of those people have medals, and they're participating because they either A, don't feel comfortable marching, and that's not because they're not encouraged to march. There is a very large group of younger veterans that march in Brisbane City. I know we're in a unique position because of being where we are. We have the Gallipoli barracks, we have the Amberley, so the RAF are there, and then we get the Navy contingent as well. So the Anzac Day Parade for the younger veterans is still very important.
Thanks, Wendy. Look, ladies and gentlemen, I know there are a few other questions, but unfortunately time